September 27th, 1944. The medieval fortress city of Metz, France. For 34 consecutive days, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Britain's most celebrated general, the hero of El Alamein, the architect of D-Day's ground strategy, has thrown the full weight of his 21st Army Group against this German stronghold. He has used artillery barrages that turned the sky black. He has sent wave after wave of his finest infantry units into the stone fortifications. He has deployed armor, air support, and every tactical advantage the Allied war machine can provide. The Germans hold. Montgomery's casualties mount. His timetable collapses. His reputation begins to crack. On October 1st, Supreme Allied Commander Dwight David Eisenhower makes a decision that will humiliate the British High Command and reveal something about American military thinking that still sparks debate today. He gives the Metz objective to Lieutenant General George Smith Patton Jr., the profane, aggressive, theory-breaking American commander that Montgomery privately calls a reckless cowboy. Patton takes one look at Montgomery's failed strategy and does something that makes every British staff officer think he has lost his mind. He ignores the fortress entirely. Within 24 hours, Metz falls. Winston Churchill, when briefed on exactly how Patton did it, reportedly sat in silence for a full minute before saying a single word. "Let me show you what happened. Here is what you need to understand about Metz. This was not just a city. It was a 2,000-year-old fortress complex that had never been taken by direct assault in its entire history. Not by the Romans, not by the Franks, not by the Germans in 1870, not by anyone. The city sat on a massive hill surrounded by a network of 43 interconnected forts, built by the Germans between 1870 and 1918, specifically to be impregnable. These were not simple concrete bunkers. They were underground cities. Fort Dryant, the largest, had 20-foot-thick reinforced concrete walls, multiple levels extending 100 feet underground, its own water supply, its own hospital, its own ammunition factories, and interlocking fields of fire that could devastate anything approaching from any direction. The Germans had spent 74 years perfecting these defenses. Every approach was covered by machine gun nests positioned with mathematical precision. Every gap was a kill zone. Every route was mined. The Moselle River wrapped around the city like a natural moat, and the bridges had been destroyed. Montgomery studied all of this and came to a logical conclusion. Metz had to be reduced through systematic siege warfare. Surround it, cut off supplies, bombard it into submission, starve out the defenders. It was textbook, it was British, it was methodical, and for 34 days it failed spectacularly. But here is what Montgomery did not know, or perhaps more accurately, here is what his entire military education prevented him from understanding. The Germans inside Metz were not actually trapped. They were connected to the broader German defensive network through a series of underground tunnels and camouflage supply routes that British intelligence had completely missed. Every night, under cover of darkness, German reinforcements, ammunition, and food moved in and out of the fortress complex. Montgomery was besieging a fortress that was being continuously resupplied. His artillery was pounding concrete that was designed to absorb exactly that kind of punishment. His infantry was attacking positions that had been mathematically designed to slaughter infantry. And the Germans, watching this unfold from their fortified positions, were bleeding Montgomery's forces at a rate of 12 British casualties for every one German loss. After 34 days, Montgomery had lost 3,847 men. The Germans had lost approximately 320. The fortress stood. The British advance had stalled. Eisenhower was facing a strategic crisis that threatened to derail the entire Allied push toward Germany. Here is where Patton enters the picture. When Eisenhower reassigns the Metz objective to Third Army, Patton sends a single reconnaissance team to study the fortress. They return with the same assessment every military analyst had reached for the past month. Metz cannot be taken by direct assault. The fortifications are too strong. The defenders are too well positioned. Any attack will result in catastrophic casualties. Patton's response, according to his chief of staff, Colonel Harkins, was 2 words: "We're bypassing it." The staff officers in the room think they've misheard him. You cannot bypass Metz. It controls the region. It dominates the roads. It blocks the advance. Leaving it in German hands means leaving a dagger at your back, a constant threat to your supply lines, a strategic nightmare. This is Military Doctrine 101. You cannot advance past a major enemy stronghold without neutralizing it first. Patton looks at the map. He looks at his officers, and he says something that becomes legendary in Third Army. Fortresses are only strong if you are dumb enough to attack them. We are going around. Let me show you what Patton saw that Montgomery did not. Montgomery looked at Metz and saw a military objective that had to be conquered. Patton looked at Metz and saw 12,000 German soldiers who were doing absolutely nothing. Think about that. The Germans had committed a full division to defending a fortress that only mattered if someone attacked it. Every soldier sitting in those concrete bunkers, every artillery piece pointed at empty kill zones, every ton of ammunition stockpiled in those underground magazines was a resource the German army desperately needed elsewhere. And Montgomery had just spent 34 days proving that attacking Metz was suicide. So Patton does something that violates every principle of conventional siege warfare. He moves his entire army 40 miles north of Metz, crosses the Moselle River at an undefended point, and drives directly toward the German border as if Metz does not exist. He leaves behind a single regiment, the 95th Infantry Division, with orders that confuse every officer who reads them. Make noise. Fire artillery at random intervals. Move trucks back and forth at night with headlights on. Make the Germans think you are preparing for a major assault. But do not, under any circumstances, actually attack the fortress. Within 18 hours of Patton's main force bypassing Metz, German High Command realizes what is happening. There is an entire American army behind their primary defensive line, driving toward the German industrial heartland, and their only strategic reserve in the region is sitting inside a fortress doing nothing. Here is what happens next. At 2:17 a.m., on October 2nd, German garrison commander General Walther Krauser receives an urgent order from Berlin. Abandon Metz. Move your forces to intercept Patton's advance. Krauser reads the order twice. He's being told to abandon the most fortified position in Western Europe, a fortress his army has held for 4 years. A defensive network that has cost the British nearly 4,000 casualties without falling, because an American general simply drove around it. According to Wehrmacht communications intercepted by Allied intelligence, Krauser's response to Berlin was a single question: what do we do with the fortifications? The answer from German High Command reveals everything you need to know about what Patton had just accomplished. They are useless now. Destroy what you can and get out. By dawn on October 2nd, German engineers are setting demolition charges in Fort Driant, Fort St. Quentin, and 19 other fortress complexes. They are spiking their own artillery. They are collapsing their own tunnels. They are destroying supply depots that had taken decades to build. And then they are marching out in full retreat, trying desperately to catch up with Patton's Third Army, which is already 60 miles ahead of them. The 95th Infantry Division, the American unit that had been making noise outside Metz, receives new orders at 6:43 a.m. The Germans are evacuating. Walk in and occupy the city by 11 o'clock am. On October 2nd, less than 24 hours after Patton received the assignment, American forces are raising the stars and stripes over the fortress of Metz. Not a single American soldier dies taking the city. The impregnable fortress that had stood for 2,000 years falls without a shot fired. Now, here's where this story reveals something critical about the difference between British and American military doctrine in World War II. When Winston Churchill is briefed on the fall of Metz, his first reaction, according to his personal secretary John Colville's diary, is disbelief. He asks for confirmation. He asks how many casualties Patton took. When told the answer is 0, he asks how long the siege lasted. When told there was no siege, Churchill sits back in his chair and says nothing for what Colonel Colville describes as an uncomfortably long silence. Finally, Churchill says this: Montgomery spent a month and 4,000 men trying to crack that nut, and the Americans simply walked past it. Then he adds something that Colonel Colville notes as being said with a mixture of admiration and profound irritation. I am not certain if Patton is a genius, or if the rest of us have been doing this wrong for 400 years. That question gets to the heart of what made Patton's victory so significant. Because this was not just about one battle. This was about two completely different philosophies of warfare colliding in real time. Let me show you the fundamental difference. British military doctrine, the system that produced Montgomery, was built on methodical advancement. You identify the objective, you mass your forces, you apply overwhelming firepower. You reduce the enemy position. You consolidate. You advance. It is systematic. It is logical. It minimizes risk. It is the approach that had worked for the British Empire for 200 years. American doctrine, especially Patton's interpretation of it, was built on a different principle entirely. Speed and aggression create their own opportunities. Do not fight the enemy where they are strong. Do not attack fortresses. Do not do what the enemy expects. Find the gap. Exploit it. Move so fast the enemy cannot respond. Make their strengths irrelevant. Montgomery saw Metz as a problem to be solved. Patton saw it as a problem to be made irrelevant. Montgomery tried to win the battle. Patton refused to fight it. And here's the thing that made this particularly humiliating for the British High Command. Patton was not just faster. He was cheaper. Montgomery's 34-day siege of Metz cost 3,847 casualties, consumed 94,000 artillery shells, used 2.3 million gallons of fuel, and tied down an entire army group that could have been advancing. Patton's bypass operation cost 22 casualties, all from scattered German rearguard resistance during the river crossing, used 840,000 gallons of fuel, and kept Third Army advancing at an average rate of 35 miles per day. The math was undeniable, and it made Montgomery look like he had been using a sledgehammer to swat a fly, while Patton simply walked around the fly and kept moving. But here's what you need to understand about why this worked. Patton was not reckless. He was not lucky. He had done something Montgomery had not. He had asked a different question. Montgomery asked, how do I take this fortress? Patton asked, why does this fortress matter? And when he looked at the strategic map, he realized the fortress only mattered because it blocked a route. But there were other routes. The Germans had assumed, correctly, that Metz was the optimal path for any Allied advance in that sector. The roads were better, the terrain was flatter, the logistics were easier. So they had fortified it into oblivion. Patton looked at the less optimal route 40 miles north. Worse roads, hillier terrain, harder logistics. And he realized something critical. Harder for me means possible for me. Impossible for Montgomery means he will not try it. And if Montgomery will not try it, the Germans will not defend it. So that is where I am going. This is the essence of what made Patton different. He did not just think about what he could do. He thought about what the enemy expected him to do, and then he did something else. Now, let me show you what happened after Metz fell, because this is where the story gets even more revealing. You would think that after pulling off one of the most elegant tactical victories of the Western European campaign, Patton would be celebrated. He was not. British Field Marshal Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, wrote in his diary on October 4, 1944, that Patton's Metz operation was, quote, more luck than judgment. The sort of reckless gamble that occasionally succeeds and encourages further recklessness. Montgomery himself refused to acknowledge Patton's success in his official report, referring to the fall of Metz only as the fortress being abandoned by the enemy, due to an untenable strategic position, with no mention of who created that untenable position. And here is the most telling detail. When Eisenhower's staff proposed publicly crediting Patton with the Metz victory as a morale boost for American forces. British military liaison officers quietly pushed back, arguing that it would be seen as criticism of Montgomery's earlier failure. The publicity was quietly shelved, but the German military did not miss what had happened. In Wehrmacht after-action reports captured at the end of the war, German commanders analyzing the Metz operation wrote that Patton had demonstrated an understanding of operational mobility that exceeded anything they had seen from British or even Soviet commanders. One report, authored by General Fritz Bayerlein, who had faced both Montgomery and Patton in North Africa and Europe, put it bluntly: Montgomery fights to win battles. Patton fights to make battles irrelevant. We can defeat the first. We have no counter for the second. Here's what makes this particularly significant in the broader context of World War II. Patton's Metz operation was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern that defined the American approach to the European war. While Montgomery was fighting the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, with a meticulously planned counteroffensive that took 3 weeks to organize, Patton wheeled Third Army 90 degrees north in 48 hours and hit the German flank before they could consolidate their gains. While British forces were methodically clearing the Netherlands in early 1945, Patton was racing across southern Germany at a pace that terrified his own supply officers. And when the war ended, Third Army had advanced further, faster, and with fewer casualties per mile gained than any other Allied army in the European theater. The numbers are stark. From August 1944 to May 1945, Montgomery's 21st Army Group advanced approximately 450 miles and suffered 194,000 casualties. Patton's Third Army advanced 1,200 miles and suffered 137,000 casualties. Patton moved 2.7 times farther and lost 29,000 fewer men doing IT. Now, to be fair to Montgomery, he was often assigned more difficult objectives and faced stiffer German resistance in the northern sector. But that's exactly the point. Patton's entire operational philosophy was built around not accepting difficult objectives. Find the gap, exploit it, make the enemy react to you instead of reacting to them. And when you cannot go through, go around. Let me bring this to what it reveals about military doctrine. The Metz operation forced a conversation in Allied High Command that had been brewing since D-Day. Was the methodical British approach, or the aggressive American approach, the better way to win the war? Montgomery argued that his caution saved lives by not taking unnecessary risks. Patton argued that his speed saved lives by ending the war faster. Both men had data to support their positions, but here is what the historical record shows. When Third Army was advancing rapidly, German forces in their sector suffered collapse at a higher rate than sectors facing British or Canadian forces. German prisoners captured by Third Army consistently reported in interrogations that the speed of American advances created panic and disorganization that made organized resistance impossible. And post-war analysis by the United States Army War College concluded that Patton's operational tempo, his relentless emphasis on speed and exploitation, shortened the war in his sector by an estimated 4 to 7 weeks. If that analysis is correct, Patton's approach did not just save American lives. It saved German civilian lives, concentration camp prisoner lives, and prevented months of additional destruction across Europe. Speed was not recklessness. It was mercy. Now, here is the uncomfortable question this raises. If Patton's approach was so effective, why was it not adopted more widely? Why did Montgomery continue to operate with methodical caution, even after Metz proved there was another way? The answer reveals something about military culture that is still relevant today. Montgomery was a product of British military tradition that valued preparation, consolidation, and minimization of risk. His entire career had been built on careful planning. His greatest victory, El Alamein, had come from months of meticulous preparation and overwhelming force concentration. Changing that approach would have meant admitting that his entire military philosophy might be flawed. Patton, on the other hand, was a product of American military culture that valued initiative, speed, and calculated risk-taking. His entire career had been built on aggressive action. His greatest fear was not losing men in a bold attack. It was wasting time with caution while the enemy escaped. Neither man could change who they fundamentally were. And so Eisenhower, caught between these two philosophies, made a pragmatic choice. He let both men operate according to their nature and assigned them objectives that suited their strengths. Montgomery got the methodical operations. Patton got the exploitation missions. And together, despite loathing each other, they won the war. But here's what the Metz operation proved beyond any doubt. Sometimes the smartest way to win is to refuse to fight. Sometimes the fortress that looks impregnable is actually a prison for the enemy forces inside it. And sometimes the boldest move is the one that looks like you are running away when you are actually setting a trap. Patton understood something that took military theorists another 40 years to formalize. In modern warfare, maneuver is more valuable than firepower. Speed is more valuable than strength. And making the enemy react to you is more valuable than reacting to them. The Germans spent decades building Metz into an unbreakable fortress. Patton broke it in 24 hours by making it irrelevant. Montgomery spent 34 days trying to go through the fortress. Patton spent 24 hours going around it, and when it was over, Churchill sat in silence, wondering if everything the British Empire thought it knew about warfare had just been proven obsolete by a profane American general who refused to play by the rules. So here is my question for you. Knowing what Patton accomplished at Metz, knowing that he took in 24 hours what Montgomery could not take in 34 days, and knowing that he did it with 0 casualties by simply refusing to fight the battle, do you think Patton was a reckless cowboy who got lucky? Or do you think he understood something about warfare that the British establishment could not accept? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story changed how you understand World War II tactics and the difference between American and British military doctrine, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that reveals what actually happened behind the myths. Thanks for watching.